and thank you for allowing me to do that. Trying to juggle too many things at once here today on a Saturday afternoon. So, in session two, we are talking about understanding the language and family patterns that exist um, in the environment of poverty. And also, sandwiched in between that, we're going to look at chapter 7 in the book. So, it's chapter 3, 7, and 10. Chapter 3 deals with the language, chapter 10 deals with family patterns, and then chapter 7 is how does the church really fit into all of this? And how do we need to see ourselves in order to better minister to people in poverty? And that's the real key. We have to change more about ourselves first before we're able to be effective in being a catalyst of change for folks who find themselves really at a place lower than what God intends. And that's why the scripture, from almost cover to cover, speaks of his desire for for God's people to care for the poor and for those in poverty and for those that are in need, because it's his way of allowing us to join in his redemptive work. And these are one of these type of situations are concrete in people's life. We can touch them, we can see them, we can feel them, we have empathy for them, and it's always much easier to address and approach these situations with people than it is often to do the spiritual side of things. And quite often, to be honest, folks that are in real need, physically, emotionally, mentally, the spiritual side of thing is really kind of behind that train. It's the caboose bringing everything up, which is no less important. But from the way that we help people, we need to be aware of just what they need to feel comfortable with who the people of God are. And so we're going to talk about that in the church. Now, these patterns of language are important because we all are captive to it. I find myself, if you want to, in your book, it's these are on page 32, 31, 32, 33. It talks about the different patterns of language there. We're just going to briefly talk about them, and then you can use this week to catch up from last week, which was rather lengthy, and then do this work and get into the next session. But these patterns of language do hold us captive, and I find myself, sometimes uncomfortable with the way that some of my peers talk and communicate. Many pastors seem to be so formal in the way that they speak, and I'm not that way. I'm much more casual, as you probably have noticed, and I guess much more free with my thinking. Sometimes it does feel erratic and disjointed and those kind of things to others, and I have to explain myself over and over sometimes. And so we find these registers or language patterns that exist really at different socioeconomic levels, and really when it comes to the language of work at different levels of work. Um, the language that welders and pipe fitters use on the job are much different than the language that's going to be used in an office building somewhere. And so, quite often, it's the language barrier that causes as much problem as anything. And it becomes a barrier to communication. It becomes a barrier to relationship because we're not comfortable in the way that we're trying to communicate with one another. It's almost like a foreign language. And so our responsibility as mentors is to be aware of of that particular situation. And it doesn't mean that we have to in particularly begin to change everything about the way we communicate in order to communicate with others. But then in a sense it does mean that. We have to be aware of what's going on. We have to understand that when we're listening and I'm not quite making sense of what is being said to me, that it may just be that's the language pattern and the communication pattern that's been used in the family or in the neighborhood, the community. Um, and so it's not that they don't understand what they're trying to say, or it's not doesn't mean that the person is not capable of communicating. It's just that it's on a different plane, and so we are the ones that are responsible for recognizing that and making those adjustments. And so on in the book in chapter 3, it talks about how um, storytelling's important, and how even at different levels, the very formal level has a beginning and a plot and an end, and then in the very casual storytelling, it may be very erratic and ask for participation from the audience. You may want some feedback from the audience to get through the story. You're looking for something to let those that are listening know that they're engaged. But that's not always necessary at the formal level, because it's very organized and laid out. And at the end, they believe the person that speaks that way or tells a story in that way or presents information that way, they believe that you'll understand when they're through. But in the more casual, it's the feedback along the way that allows for a person to know that what they are attempting to communicate is actually getting through. And so when we look at this and how it affects churches, very often uh, curricula that we use in Bible study is presented on a different language register and plane than what some that are in a place of poverty may experience, and so they don't quite follow the material that well. Often when we teach out of our comfort zone, and so we have to constantly remind ourselves that I'm speaking to people that are in other places. They've come out of other dynamics, and I need to maybe repeat myself in different ways so that everyone is able to understand. When we're presenting business and meetings, budgets, all those sorts of things, a lot of that information is not used every day by some folks, and so we have to be sure that we are explaining as we go, and making sure that everyone is crystal clear and they're comfortable, because those barriers can make a person feel as though they're really not a part of the church, and we don't want to do that. Preaching's the same way. We have to preach in a way that kind of flattens out everything, and you use illustrations or different theological points that that may arouse in a person that speaks in a more formal tone. It may arouse in them thoughts that allow for them to digest what you're saying in a way that they appreciate. And at the other end, at the casual end, that you use illustrations and language and tone that allows for them to relate to it as well. So all these things become very important as we move through our attempts to help people find their place of I hate to use the word equality, because it's being lambasted everywhere today, and we don't really it keeps being redefined as to what that means. When I thought it was pretty simple before, but we want everybody to feel comfortable in their own skin and know that they are valued and loved. I think two of the primary motivators of everyone that walks the planet is that we all want to be known and we all want to be loved. And so when we allow our lives to say to another person, I really know you, and if you don't, say, I really want to know you, and I do, I truly love you. I think that changes the dynamic, and we can walk together through most anything and establish relationship when those two primary core needs are being met in the relationship. Okay, in chapter 7, then, this is the chapter that talks about church participation, and what it really hones in on is the idea that we get so used to being who we are and doing things the way that we do them that we forget that people on the outside looking in may look at all of that and say, "Man, I don't relate or understand any of that. These people really think that they're all that," and that's not the way I view my life. It's not the way I view God. It's they're really concerned about some things, or maybe they're not concerned about some things. You may have some people that operate at a particular socioeconomic level, and they walk into your facility and they don't understand why the carpet's 20 years old. They believe that a church, that's the house of the Lord, and that's the way they think of it, should have fresh decor and interior all the time to make people feel as though this is a very special place. Then you have others who walk in and that won't be a problem at all. In fact, they would see that new carpet's just a waste of money. That could be used on the poor. So you've got these different things that are going on in the church all the time. You've got those perceptions. You've got the language that we've already talked about. We have the way in which we approach people. Some folks, especially in a lower economic level, people are very open with one another, and they got no reason not to be. And so they're very open with one another, and so that's how they communicate, and that's how they interact with people. And when they walk into a place and that's not the case, they feel like fish out of water. They don't know what to do with themselves. And so they're waiting for someone. This is your house, so they're waiting for someone to treat them like they would if you walked into their house. And if that doesn't happen, then there's not much relationship building there that is possible. So again, when we go back to the idea that everyone desires to be known and to be loved, then we have to know those people when they're walking through the door, and we have to open our lives up. We have to open ourselves up to them graciously and lovingly, possibly mercifully, as they come in and are total strangers to the environment that you normally see yourself in church, and you make them feel right at home, like you've spent your life preparing for this moment when they walk through the door. And if we do that as we mentor, when we have that feeling or we allow for them to have that feeling that says, I've been preparing myself for this moment with you my whole life, and I'm ready, and I want to give you everything that I can of myself, so that we can have this relationship that builds and lifts up to God. Then I think that's a very attractive thing. Finally, in chapter 10, and I will be short doing this because I really have a hard time just sitting here talking and recording this stuff. Chapter 10 is another chapter that talks about the issues of integrating the poor into the church, and I've talked a little bit about that. And in this particular chapter, there's some good information that you'll have in your notes that comes from Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it talks about the way that we make deposits and withdrawals in life, emotionally. We seek first to understand, but when we withdraw, we're trying to be understood. So you've kind of got this give and take. We want to understand people, and that builds an emotional bank account, so to speak. But then there are days when I need to be understood, and those are withdrawals. And sometimes we selfishly need to be understood, and sometimes we need it therapeutically for someone to understand us. But that has to be built back with folks. It's not unlike forgiveness, these give and takes that are described here. Somewhere along the lines, in a mentoring relationship, you're going to realize that this is going to cost me some way. I mean, emotionally, mentally, even physically, can become exhausting. And, and what you receive back as a result of that may not ever equal what you give. And in forgiveness, we do that. When someone harms us, we can either demand payment, we can demand justice, or we can say, I'm willing to pay the price and I'm going to forgive, which is exactly what Jesus taught us to do. And it's what God demonstrated on the cross for us as he saved us from our sin and from death. And so there are moments in our relationship with people where we just have to say, man, this isn't working the way that I want it to work. It's not going to produce the results that I want it to produce in this moment. It's not proceeding to plan. And you have to be able to say, I'm going to let that go. I'm willing to pay the price for this shortcoming so that we can continue to move forward together. And so some of this that we see and how the way we do this integrating poor into church becomes important because some people are needy. And so we've got to decide that we're going to meet those needs and not measure their worth accordingly, not measure our response accordingly. We're going to be the good Samaritan. We're going to do whatever it takes. We're going to get in the ditch and we're going to work through it. And in the end, we're willing to pay the price so that they're renewed and restored. And that becomes the DNA of your church, so that you have people. The lion is lying down with the lamb. That you're working in every way so that everyone is able to sit under their vine and their fig tree, as is described in Micah. That they're at peace. That they have what they need. It's not more than they need. It's not extravagant. They just have their place under heaven that is theirs. The swords have been beat into plowshares. They don't have to worry about what society or culture or the church or any of those entities. They don't have to worry anymore about that being threatening to who they are. That they've been given a place that where they have peace with God, peace with themselves, peace with their fellow man. And we have the opportunity to help some folks do that. And I hope that that's the vein in which you're approaching this, because I think you'll be successful. Regardless of what happens, you'll be successful, and you'll also be fulfilled. And I think we talk about reward sometime, but fulfillment is a real deal. I mean, it really feels good.